Today, our youngest son Ben getting married. We have a very, very special day. There's us looking unusually smart. I'm looking unusually smart. Lovely wedding in Burton College Chapel in Oxford. And there's a lovely bride and groom, Ben and Anna, with the wedding cake which Hazel made. So we had a very special day yesterday. Very full on. One of the things that we learnt about Anna in the various speeches is her capacity for napping. She can just sort of have a little nap here, there and anywhere, quite happily, little 40 winks, which is a great skill. I just sort of feel like I might have a little nap during this talk this morning. I'm quite tired. So if the words sort of veer off in some weird, irrational direction and I slump, you'll know why. Okay, so today, again, slightly ironically really, we're looking at David and Bathsheba. Not the obvious wedding theme, but... and I'm calling today's talk The Anatomy of a Fall, which some of you may recognise as a film title. And we're looking at how godly men and women are in danger of falling. It's a slightly sobering topic today, but it's an important one. So, I've got a bit of an echo here. I'm not quite sure why, but okay. So let's read some of this chapter. I will paraphrase bits of it. But here we are. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. And then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, "I am pregnant." So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go down to his house. David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from the military campaign? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." And again, many of you will know what happens next. David contrives to get Uriah killed. He arranges for Uriah to be put in the front line of the battle to conduct a reckless advance against the enemy in the expectation that Uriah will get killed, as indeed he was. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. It's a bit of an understatement, that probably. Okay. So it is a story of a fall. David, the man after God's heart, David, the psalmist, David, the slayer of Goliath, David, the one who had ruled as a godly king, in contrast to Saul, and in so many ways living a godly life. And we come to this episode. And inevitably today, our focus is on sort of, if you like, what David did wrong. And we're also going to allude to several other people who have in a similar way fallen. But as we do this, it's really important that we're not simply looking at other people and thinking, oh goodness me, how could they have done that? 1 Corinthians says, these things, talking about episodes from the Old Testament, happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. And the spirit in which we approach anything like this is not one of finger pointing at powerful people who've gone astray. It's if you think you stand, be careful lest you fall. Because we are all vulnerable. We are all capable of falling. And we are never too old to fall. We never get to a point of, right, well, I've walked with God so long and I've reached a certain age, I'm not going to fall into these traps. The positive side, though, is what the verse goes on to say. God is faithful. Sorry, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so you can endure it. Falling is not inevitable. And when we come to scriptures like this, they are written for us to learn from. To examine our consciences and our lives. To be honest before God. To have our complacency prodded. But also to know that it doesn't have to happen. If we're wise, if we're learning from Scripture, if we're learning from the Holy Spirit, God is faithful. There is always a way to avoid falling into sin. So that's the context, and that's, if you like, the posture we should have as we approach stories like this. But what I want to do now is I just really want to, I've called it the anatomy of a fall. I want to have a little look and try and analyse exactly how this came about. And at each point, in a sense, they say when you point your finger, 3 point back at you. At each point, we need to examine ourselves, don't we? So here's the first one. There were holes in his holiness. I got a bit distracted by the English language at this point. That means he's got holy holiness. That means he was not holy. And his holiness was not holistic. Anyway, so yes, I spent quite a long time sort of exploring the vagaries of the English language at this point before I got back to what I was really thinking about. But a few weeks ago, when we first started looking at the life of David, I think it was in the first of the talks on the series, I was saying, David is known as a man after God's own heart, and yet we all know that he is far from perfect. And I suggested that most of us live our lives in, I've called it 3 different dimensions or 3 different contexts. We have our public life, our outward-facing life, our job, our ministry, the roles we play in society. We have our devotional life. We are spiritual. We have the capacity to relate to God. But then we have our private life. That's what we do on our own, in our thoughts, with our family, in our private relationships. And the point I made back then was, in retrospect, we look back on David, and it seems as if he was exemplary in the first 2 of those areas. He was the exemplary king after God's heart. He had an exemplary devotional life. He's provided half the Psalms. He's provided much of the worship writing for the Jewish people and for the church down the millennia. And yet, there were holes in his holiness. There were aspects of his life that, for whatever reason, he didn't allow to be sanctified by God. And You could call it hypocrisy, you could certainly call it inconsistency. But again, how easy is that to be the case with each one of us? Now, I could unfortunately come up with a fairly long list of prominent contemporary figures who we could see similar things happening. I'm going to name three, which are all in the public domain. You'll know of them. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. I don't know how much you read the news. Geoffrey Donaldson was the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, an exemplary Protestant Christian. I think he was an elder in his church. He was known as a Christian politician, standing up for Christian values, fighting all the Christian causes in Northern Ireland. A man with an exemplary public face. Now found guilty of 18 historic sexual abuse charges, including rape. Behind that facade, there was a secret life. There was some fairly big holes in his holiness. Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Chief Executive of the Scottish Nationalist Party, former Public Relations Officer for the Church of Scotland, highly respected, highly reputed civil servant and politician, public figure of apparently high moral standing, found to have embezzled £400,000 from the party and guilty of serious financial corruption. Case study number 3, Mike Pilavachi, founder of Soul Survivor, well-known figurehead of charismatic, spirit-filled Christianity, influencing thousands of young lives for good. Found guilty of, to quote the report, using his spiritual authority to control people, and that his coercive and controlling behaviour led to inappropriate relationships. Sad stories, and the list could go on, and if you follow the Christian news or even the ordinary news, you will know of some other names. Mainly men. But I suspect that is coincidental. I don't think women are immune. I chose those 3 because they highlight 3 key vulnerabilities: sex, money, and power. Each of those cases, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and abuse of power. Those are 3 big temptations, especially for people who are called into leadership. But for all of us, I suspect. It doesn't have to be those things. Maybe pride is the hole in your holiness. Maybe it is bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness that's the hole in your holiness. Maybe it is anger. Maybe it is greed. Could be all sorts of areas where we can be living exemplary Christian lives in our public and our devotional sphere, and yet there are areas of our private lives that we have not submitted to the Lordship and the sanctifying process of God. Moving on from that, continuing my anatomy of a fall, second thing I want to say is, how did it happen? Gradually, then suddenly. Now again, that's a phrase you may have heard. It comes from a book by Hemingway called The Sun Always Rises, where a character is asked how he went bankrupt. He said in 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And that little phrase has been adopted, used in different contexts. Christian author Mark Batterson has made it the title of one of his books, where he's actually turned it around to a positive and said, how do you get breakthrough and revival? Gradually, then suddenly. And I think that's good. But how did David fall? On the surface, David's fall was sudden and shocking and surprising. Having lived, a godly life, the exemplary king, suddenly this happens. But actually you look back and you realise probably you could see it coming. There's that interesting little section in 2 Samuel when civil war is happening in the lands. Joab's forces on David's behalf versus Abner's forces on Saul's behalf, and the civil war. And I commended David when we looked at this for not being engaged in factionalism, and the only role he played in the factional fighting was when Abner came to submit. He played a role of reconciliation and unity, and he kept out of all of this unwholesome factional civil war. But the only thing it says about David throughout that entire section is, well, it says this: the war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Then it just says, sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon, the son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second, Kileab, the son of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, the son of David's wife, Eglah. I'm amazed I can do that after that wedding. Anyway, these were born to David in Hebron. Now, suddenly all these wives and children have popped up. He's just been picking up wives. Now, the text here doesn't give any commentary about whether we're meant to think that's a good thing or a bad thing. But what we do know is Deuteronomy 14 said, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us, various warnings about what the king should not do. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. David would have known that. David was a man after God's heart. David was seeking to rule and reign in accordance with the will of God. And yet, not this area by the looks of things. You see, David had if you like, there was a long smouldering fuse of undiscipline in this area of his life. I know you were allowed more than one wife in those days. It's not quite comparable to today, but all the indications are that he was not exercising discipline. He never says he inquired of the Lord about any of these wives. It says he inquired about the Lord about lots of other things, but not his relationship with sex and with women. Just a little sort of almost an aside in 2 Samuel 3. So when this fall comes, it's sudden, but it is probably a sudden fall due to a lifestyle of disobedience, lack of rigour in seeking God, lack of self-discipline in dealing with a particular area of temptation, allowing himself leeway in a particular area, whereas he might be very rigid in his holiness in other areas. I know I am more sanctified in some areas than others. How do we say this? You know, there are areas where I know I shouldn't do this, and I never would. There are probably other areas where I allow myself a little bit more leeway. And I think it's not a very big sin. It's not doing anyone any harm. I know technically God says I shouldn't be doing it, but hey, not too bad. Listen, those sorts of areas in your life where you give yourself leeway, or where you simply don't get round to asking God, they can be the gradualies that create vulnerabilities, that create the suddenly. And you can suddenly do something seriously wrong. David's fall did not come out of the blue. It came out of, to change the image, it came out of areas of his garden that he had left untended. He may have weeded and tended and planted certain areas very well, but there were other areas of his life that he had left untended. And his fall came out of that. Third bit of forensic analysis. He was off duty. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, this is fairly pointed, this actually. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, he got up from his bed where he was having a nice chill and relax and walked on the roof of the palace. David, it doesn't explicitly say it, but I think it is fairly obviously implicitly there that David ought to have been with his armies at war. Now, okay, we are in a different context and the idea of going to war is iffy, but kings were supposed to go to war. Part of their duties was to lead their armies in battle. In the spring, that's where David should have been, doing the Lord's work. For whatever reason, he chose to give himself time out. Let others get on with serving the Lord. I am just going to have a little bit of off duty, a little bit of leisure, going to just chill and relax in Jerusalem and enjoy my palace, including its rooftop. Now, it's that old little sort of cliche, the devil makes work for idle hands, isn't there? But I do think, if I were to sort of take a scriptural version of that, walk in the Spirit and you will not fulfill the desires of the flesh, Paul says. If we are fully on duty, doing the things that God has called us to do, we are less likely to give way to self-indulgent sin. Now, obviously, there is a Sabbath rest principle. I am not now calling on everybody to be, obsessively and ridiculously busy. But we are created to do work. We are designed for purpose and calling. For each one of us, there are responsibilities, ministries, duties, callings that we should be doing. And if we're doing them, we're unlikely to be going astray. It's when we, if you like, sign ourselves off on sick leave from God's purposes. We say, no, okay, I'm just going to, I know that's really what I should be doing, but I'm tired. I'm going to give myself time out. Now, of course, there are right times to do that. This is a balance in this. But the implication clearly is that David had chosen to give himself a time of leisure when he should have been busy serving the Lord. He was off duty when he should have been on duty. Often it's when we're tired, when we've chosen the option of rest and leisure rather than keeping going in the calling that's from God, that we are especially vulnerable. If you're busy doing God's calling, you're much less likely to go off the rails. If you're in a leisure time, especially if it's one you have chosen for yourself rather than one that, if you like, is legitimately been given to you, then you are more vulnerable. David should have been out with his troops. Fourth thing, it's 5. Scooping fire into your lap. Proverbs 6:27-29 says, "Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished." David put himself in the way of temptation. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of this, but it's night time, he's in the palace, it's hot, he can't sleep, who knows where his thoughts are going. He says, I'm just going to have a little stroll on the roof of the palace, very innocent. And he just happens to see a woman bathing on their own rooftop, which would be lower than the palace rooftop, of course, if you're looking down. Now, I don't know whether he'd ever actually seen this woman before, but he might have done. He might have gone up onto the palace. I'm just going up onto the palace rooftop. And there's a sort of, yes, I know there might be a pretty naked woman in a bath down there, but I'm not going up to put, I'm not going to do anything. Now, can you put fire in your lap without being scorched? Sometimes, in a sense, he was putting himself in a position of temptation. He was putting himself in a place where he had a vulnerability. And there are so many sort of ways in which you could probably apply that to yourself. What are the circumstances in which you are vulnerable? What are the contexts where you are more likely to fall into temptation? There's some obvious ones. There may be some more subtle ones. I don't particularly want to go spelling them all out. Remember, God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out that you can endure it. David's way out, number one, was he should have been fighting a battle. Number two, he shouldn't have gone up onto the roof. Number three, if he'd spotted a woman and got tempted, he should have gone back inside. There were ways out. And he didn't take them. But there were ways out. But if you watch the sort of films you shouldn't be watching, or if your problem is you're a shopaholic and you spend all your time just sort of browsing, shopping on the internet, or whatever it is, you have trouble with alcohol and you accidentally on purpose walk past the off license. As I say, think of the examples. But there are so many ways in which we can put ourselves in the way of temptation. The Bible says, flee temptation. Flee when Satan comes. Once David starts looking at Bathsheba, that temptation is almost impossible to resist. If you put yourself in the way of temptation, it is really hard to resist. The Bible's instruction is run away. Run away. Don't put yourself in the way of temptation thinking you are strong enough to resist it. Run away from it. By the way, we don't know for sure, but there is no indication that Bathsheba was any way to blame for this. It says that she was cleansing herself after her monthly uncleanness. She was having a ritual bath of cleansing. She wasn't flaunting herself in any way, as far as we can see. Did she consent? Well, I think we understand nowadays that where there is a huge power imbalance of that sort, consent can never be authentic. She might have been very, honoured the king called for her. But that doesn't mean that it was a consensual relationship. His power was such he could take whoever he wanted. And she had no say in it. We might, for all we know, be looking at rape here as well. We can't be sure from what the text tells us. But certainly the prophet never confronts her. It's David who the prophet confronts. Finally, I put two together here. Entitlement and secrecy. David had a sense of entitlement as king. Why can't I have whichever woman I like as my wife? After all, I'm the king. I'm allowed to. I can get as many wives as I want, because I'm the king. Not only I'm the king, I'm God's chosen and anointed king. Not only that, he's covenanted to me that there'll be a king in the line of David forever. Not only that, he has called me a king after God's own heart. I'm clearly on good terms with God. I've clearly got a lot of spiritual credit. I've got a lot of power and social kudos. Little sin on the side, it's just a perk of the position. Sort of reminds me of Elijah after defeating the prophets of Baal, going away and saying, I've been very zealous for the Lord. There's a danger that you can think, I've done so much good that I can, entitle myself to a bit of sin on the side. And, of course, David did it in secret. He was alone. Okay, he got one of his servants to find out who the woman was and tell her to come, but he had no counsellors with him, no peers with him, no wise man. He didn't consult the prophet. He didn't wait on the Lord. He did this in secret, in the middle of the night, and no one was watching. And again, we are more likely to fall in a context of secrecy and making private judgments about what is okay to get away with. So, let's remind ourselves. I know this is a little bit heavy today, but it's what the scripture's there for. And we don't want to fall, do we? So let's just, as we go back over it, are there holes in your holiness? Are there areas of your life that you know you have not allowed the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit to operate in? Are you inconsistent? Are you very spiritual in some areas? Very holy in some areas? But other areas are not touched much? Are there areas where you fail to deal with the small sins which make you vulnerable to a big fall? Gradually, then suddenly. Have you fallen off duty in your